Perfect. I'm Hannah Haygood. I'm the HR generalist at Hoar Construction, and we're excited.
Hey guys, I'm Ashton Parker. I'm in Human Resources at Vulcan Materials Company. So we're excited to be with y'all tonight.
And thank you both so much again for spending your Wednesday evening with us. And students, I hope you buckle up and get ready for an evening full of all things interview prep. So today we will be talking through elements of the interview prep process. So yay, Jessica! Into the slides is being able to talk through the purpose of an interview, both from the employer perspective and also each of you as a potential interviewee. We'll talk about different types of interviews, how they're delivered with the lens of also our current pandemic, how each of you can prepare for a potential virtual or remote interview process. We'll get to discuss again the concept of what to be thinking about doing before the interview, during the interview process, and then even after the interview concludes, the best ways to follow up with the employers and with the companies of interest. We will chat through some questions to consider, also ways to develop your elevator pitch, and then all the great things to be considering in between. So we will go ahead and get started. I would love to hear, students, from you, just to get us started. If you could share maybe what kinds of interviews do you have coming up? What are some either interview types or even types of positions that you might be interviewing for? And you're welcome to put that in the chat box and I'll read that aloud as we get started. So an internship interview, wonderful. A full-time phone interview, full-time positions, great. Zoom, yes, which I'm sure you all are very accustomed to Zoom as of now. Any other FaceTime? Okay, a FaceTime interview. Great, so just a good feel for types of positions that you are currently going through the interview process for, and then also modalities, if you will, the ways of which the interview will be conducted. And so we'll definitely talk through some of these elements today. From the main focus being, we'll talk about on-site interviews. So in-person interviews are still happening even with the current lens of the pandemic. And then we'll also focus in on phone and virtual interviews. But I'll also be able to cover some of the other elements in different types of interviews today. So as we get going, I'll probably overuse the term interview, so I'll try my best to cut that out a little bit. But when we think about the purpose of an interview, I want you as students to be thinking about not only the lens of what is the purpose for you as the interviewee, but also why an employer might want to have an interview. And knowing that the purpose is really in alignment regardless of the role that you have in the interview process. And so to help assist with the nerves that might come from an interview process or a lot of the unknown and uncertainties is thinking the bottom line is an exchange of accurate information is how I like to think about it. It is a conversation that the interviewer gets to have with the interviewee or employer interviewee to be able to exchange information and to be able to disclose what are experiences and skills and opportunities that you wish to, that you're looking for, that you're inquiring about, and equally for the employer to recognize what your potential is for a future professional with their company or organization, and even for the future in the industry itself. And so if you can think about it from the lens of it is a conversation, exchanging information, and being able to also collect information. I like to tell students when you're preparing for an interview or even the upcoming career fair season is the lens of it's just as much of the employer trying to make sure that you fit their needs and are the best candidate for the role that they have, but also you want to make sure that that company is the right fit for you as well. And it's going to match your career goals, your personal and professional aspirations, and really everything in between. And so that exchange of information really helps from that lens, I would say. So into thinking about an exchange of information, that can happen in a lot of different ways. It could be as informal as a coffee chat, or in the lens of prior to COVID, an in-person career fair experience at an information session. And then it can get as formalized as an on-site interview. So you've been invited for an upcoming internship or full-time position to actually travel to the plant, travel to the organization to have that on-site interview. Also, you might have an on-campus interview. So again, maybe that's right after a career fair, either in our office in Brown Copel or the main career center on campus. Then we have more of a distance interview element, so a phone interview, a virtual interview, which we're going to talk through several different platforms outside of Zoom that you might recognize that you may have an upcoming interview for. And then even whether it be in person, whether it be virtual, there's an opportunity to have a panel interview. And so we'll talk through that of you as an interviewee are talking to multiple people at once that are representatives of the company. And then from a group interview perspective, is multiple candidates interviewing at once. So there are multiple interviewees being able to discuss their qualifications, their experiences, all towards one position. And then interviews during meals, knowing that even if you're interviewed for, or if you're invited to have dinner the night before to meet with employers or to meet with fellow colleagues at the organization or company, knowing that that's still an interview. It might be in a casual setting over dinner, again, over coffee, over lunch, but knowing that that's just as much of the interview process as the formalized conference room or the formalized opportunity to be on site as well. So those are just a few types. I'm curious to hear either from Ashton and Hannah, please chime in if you need to, but also from students. Are there other types of interviews that you have experienced? Or I know FaceTime was one, but are there other ones that maybe I haven't covered that we can kind of think about? I may have covered them all. We'll see. Well, as we talk through each of these today, there might be some elements to these that might be new for you. And so we'll be able to break down each of these a little bit further of just expectations for each of these interview types and then ways to navigate them, knowing that the preparation piece will probably be the most similar, but the strategies and techniques that we'll talk about a little bit further on this evening might start to differentiate a bit. So we'll look into those. So the next couple slides are just some pro tips to initially be thinking about as you prepare for some of these types of interviews. And I won't go through this too in depth because at the end of today's session, students, you will each receive an interview guide that will touch on a lot of this information all in one place. So with phone and virtual interviews, and I would say a lot of this really can be replicated for any type of interview, is being able to dress for success. And so representing yourself best, regardless of the modality of interview, is going to be ideal for you. Also, trying to eliminate any type of distraction. So from a virtual element, background noise, whether planned or unplanned. We talked about that in the beginning of the session today before we got on with you all, is just how to eliminate or minimize distractions to the best of your ability. Being able to prepare from the perspective of having your information in front of you, also feeling empowered to take notes during any type of interview process, just so you can keep up with what the employers are speaking about or talking about, or if you have questions to consider as well. Being able to speak slowly and clearly and having an enthusiastic tone of voice. That is extremely helpful, again, not only in person, but also from a distance. I find myself, which you'll probably see today, talking a little bit too fast at times. And so just taking a deep breath, nerves get the best of us. I can attest to that for sure. I tell students a lot, I actually get more nervous when I interview other people versus when I interview myself. And I think a lot of that becomes the environment. And so how can you create a calming environment for yourself, whether it be in the comfort of your own home from a virtual element or on site and in person? What are ways that you can take a deep breath, take a second. Silence is okay in an interview, is being able to gather your thoughts is something that I recommend. And then getting into interviews during meals, also in-person on-site interviews to encompass panel and group interviews overall, is having printed copies of your resume to refer to. Maybe you have updates to your resume, and so that would be a great opportunity to provide those new updates to the employer, to the interviewer. Also, again, business attire, but also packing your confidence is knowing yourself best and being able to communicate the experiences that you've had up until this point. There's a reason you've been invited to interview. There was something in your application or something in your interaction with that company and organization that allowed them to recognize, wow, I really want to talk to him further. I want to learn more about his experience or her experience that we maybe have talked about previously. And so packing your confidence is something I would really encourage you to think about. And last but not least, part of the distractions is cell phones. We are attached to them now more than ever. And so aside from the obvious on the phone interview, but if you are on a virtual interview and or if you are having coffee with an employer on site, making sure that it is silent and making sure that you can eliminate that distraction as well. So lots of things to consider. So we're going to, with that as a basis, is start to think about what should I be considering and what should I be doing even before interview day? What can I be thinking about strategies and techniques to interview best the day of? And then that follow-up piece. So after the interview's concluded, now what? Do I anxiously await the phone call, or how can I be proactive in seeing where I sit in my candidacy? And so we'll go through each of those. So kind of as we think through preparing, so before the interview, Ashton and Hannah, I'd love to hear from each of you. What would be one piece of advice or one element to consider for students preparing for either an in-person interview or a virtual interview? What would be maybe a piece of advice each of you can think about sharing with them?
I guess I would say from my perspective, the biggest thing is research the company as much as you can before you interview. It is very evident to HR or even the interviewee if someone did not do the research on the company, because you can pretty much guarantee one of the questions going to be asked is, you know, what do you know about Vulcan Materials Company? Or tell me one thing that you may have questions about what we do or how we operate our business. It's very evident when someone does their homework, I guess you can say, and checks out what we have online. And that way it also gives you an opportunity to get questions to ask the employer. Because as Marissa stated earlier, you're interviewing the company just as much as the company's interviewing you. So that would probably be the biggest thing I would do before you interview.
Yes, I would second that 100%. And I feel like some people feel like they should say, you know, I don't know anything and let the employer tell them, but we would 100% rather you have done some homework. And don't be afraid to even have a cheat sheet if it ever is in person as well. I find it that they really went above and beyond to write down. When I see our core values written on someone's sheet in front of me, that I'm like, wow, they really did some research and some digging. And so I would definitely say that as well, and to just ask questions and don't be afraid. At least have one question, even if you feel like it's dumb, to take away. It shows that you're at least trying and interested in the company as well.
I had a follow-up question regarding that, actually.
Yeah.
Actually, I kind of ran into this pretty recently. How I was talking to regarding a piece of advice on your research in the company before. I've run into the issue before where on the website they aren't very specific about what exactly it is that the company does. I mean, I think it was a company does machine learning and ad services, is tech kind of stuff. They were very nondescript about what exactly they did when I was taking a look on their website. Now, I don't know, who knows? I mean, maybe I didn't do a great job looking that day. Maybe I was half asleep that day or something, but that's what I was concerned about. Sometimes companies offer a very wide range of services. So I was just wondering, what's the best way to approach that if I their website didn't really give very good information as to exactly what they do.
Yeah, so I guess my perspective on that is if you see something on the website, at least reiterate what you read online and then use that as a follow-up question to say, hey, you know, I noticed online you guys, you know, we crush stone and aggregate here at Vulcan. So I see that you guys, you know, crush stone and aggregate. What exactly does that entail, or what exactly is that process? That way you can get more knowledge about the company through the interview. Because I agree, you know, I've looked at a lot of company websites and sometimes they're pretty descriptive and sometimes not, but that kind of gives you an opportunity to be engaged with the employer and ask them what exactly they do. So.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Great question. And I think that that leads us right into part of the preparation research is how you can rely on additional resources even outside of the company's website. I see that sometimes with students who even find job descriptions that have anything but a description as part of it. And so it's very minimal in terms of information shared, but how you can kind of continue to still find those resources. And we'll talk about that in just a few slides. So I think that that's a great point, is how much information you can find and how are ways, as Hannah mentioned, to have those notes in front of you. It's okay to look at that information so that you get it right. I don't think the assumption is you have to memorize the company's mission and values, but being able to infuse them into your responses can make all the difference and showcase your research. So as part of the interview preparation is looking the part, is dressing to impress. And so the next slide kind of hones in on some opportunities to consider, knowing that even in a virtual world, you want to still dress as if you are in person. No, I'm not going to check if you have closed-toed shoes. I will out myself. I have open-toed shoes on at the moment, but being able to represent yourself well, regardless if you are in person, on site, or virtually. And there are some tips and options here to consider. I will also say, if you are looking to expand your professional wardrobe, we have a campus career closet here on campus that is open for business. And so the main career center in Mary Martin Hall is currently allowing for appointments to be reserved, that you can go in and find free professional clothing, which I think is a great opportunity to consider, just to expand, if nothing else, your professional wardrobe and get that blazer that fits just right. And so that can be an opportunity to consider as well. I, as a follow-up today, will make sure to include a link to that if any students are interested. So to Stephen's question, and he set me up for success there, in terms of preparing and research, I want you all to be thinking about ways in which to understand the company best, but also the position itself, and then most importantly, yourself. Understanding and tailoring, how am I going to be the best candidate and put my best foot forward, is being able to be infused in the research that I've done. So from the company perspective, yes, first and foremost, check out Hoar Construction, check out Vulcan Materials Company websites. In addition, start to think about, where do they also represent themselves? Do they have a LinkedIn account? Do they have social media platforms? Those are all great elements to continue to dig and continue to find ways to not only see what the company's doing, but from a LinkedIn perspective, being able to see what current employees are doing. If nothing else, if you want to understand more about the role that you're doing, go and search for current interns at Hoar Construction or current full-time professional engineers at Vulcan Materials, and see what they include on their profiles that might give you a good sense of what they might be doing from the day-to-day perspective. Also, recent news headlines. What are projects that each of the companies might be currently doing in their multiple locations? How are they infused in the community? Also, think about from diversity and inclusion and equity. What are they doing to make strides in a direction to provide an element of confidence that you can have in the workplace? And so within the news, within social media, within LinkedIn, so knowing that there are multiple ways that you can continue to develop an understanding for the company as a whole, but also the individuals that represent that company. In addition, the position, yes, the position description, but also think through what skill set is going to make you marketable for that role. If you want to know about different locations, I know a lot of positions posted have multiple locations, understanding salary, understanding cost of living, those are all great elements that you want to consider even at the research stage before you interview for a position. And then knowing yourself best, representing yourself through your resume, through your application material, but also being able to speak to those experiences through your resume in the interview process will make all the difference. So a couple things to consider there as well. And with that, additional considerations that I want to encourage you to look at are from the current pandemic. So currently with thinking through health and safety concerns in terms of where you plan to interview, if you're interviewing in person, how to navigate that effectively with the contact even before you arrive. Any travel restrictions, policies and procedures that maybe the company has in place that they've disclosed to you of how they want the interview to go. Greetings and handshakes. I have to quote Ashton when we met to talk about this. Something at Vulcan Materials is yay for masks and nay for handshakes. And so how to just navigate social distancing in an in-person setting. Not to put Hannah or Ashton on the spot, but I'm curious, genuinely asking from a human resources perspective, what would you recommend for a student who has been asked to interview in person, but has a lot of reservations about their health and safety in relation to an in-person interaction?
I feel like that's so hard because I know that we as a company have talked about how we want to have, if we like them virtually at a career fair or co-op interview day, that we want to bring them in, but you also have to understand that they might not feel that way as well. So I would just maybe ask well, what are your guidelines? Like, how is this going to go down? So I would feel more comfortable knowing all that. We know that it's something we're all trying to do right now. And, we all could have underlying health conditions that could make it so much worse if we were in contact, and no company wants to have that on them. Like, oh, the student came in and then left with COVID either. So I would just maybe ask, masks are a thing for us in our office, and all this. So I feel like there is where you would have to social distance, maybe one side of the conference room table, the other person on the other complete opposite end. And it might go like that, but I would just kind of ask and say, like, how are you open to doing these?
Yeah, I would echo that. You can't be too transparent about it. So just be open about your concerns and maybe ask exactly what you need to know before, and maybe they can ease that concern. But, hey, if it still doesn't seem like a comfort level for you, then just let them know that. Because like Hannah said, no company is going to want to put you in a bad position. So.
Absolutely. Thank you both. That's something we now have to infuse into the interview preparation process. But I think, just to echo Hannah and Ashton, is being able to advocate for yourself and being able to communicate as clearly as possible will really make all the difference. But it equally is going to be a great representation of yourself as a candidate, is that you want nothing more than to go and interview and to potentially get that full-time job offer, but you want to make sure that you feel confident in being able to do that. And so I would encourage each of you that as you navigate this process, should you receive an on-site invitation for a company or organization, that's something that our office within CDCR is happy to help navigate alongside you. So thank you both. And with that, transitioning into a virtual lens a little bit. So from a preparation piece is knowing and understanding not only what platform you'll use, but how to use it as effective as possible. And as you already saw tonight, we love Zoom. We know the ins and outs of Zoom, but it's at times something I want you to be mindful of is technology doesn't always go exactly how we want it to. So what is going to still allow you to not get frazzled, to not get so nervous that it's not working correctly, that you're not able to communicate to the best of your ability, your experiences, and represent yourself best. So these are just an example of some platforms that we've already been made aware of that companies and organizations are utilizing for the interview process. Most, if not all of them, you can create an account, no problem. There will be times where companies and organizations might send you an invitation to a platform. And so checking that out as early as possible and doing your research on how to use it best would be my best piece of advice for moving forward. And so that, again, is something that comes with time, comes with practice, but remaining calm and understanding that. Another advice, little tip, is to make sure you have your phone nearby, especially in the virtual world, so that if the connection is off, if your internet's being funny, you can immediately jump on that phone with that employer and continue the conversation in the interview. And so that would be something I would suggest as well. The next slide is something you will receive a attachment to once we get up and running again, full Zoom, is we've created a Zooming into Engineering Interviews virtual guide. And although this is Zoom specific, there are elements in here that I feel like you can also adapt to any virtual platform. So understanding technology best, checking your internet connection, testing your video and audio settings, display settings, how potentially in most platforms you can have your name. So having it loud and clear, it's Marissa Miller versus maybe your Auburn username sometimes come up. So how to make that adjustment, background and lighting, environment, again, how to prepare best. Also, to point out, our office actually has multiple interview room spaces available that you can reserve. And so that will be included after tonight's presentation, that you can happily connect with our team so that we can get you set up in here in a quiet interview space. Several rooms actually have the laptop and webcam already set up for you that you can happily use for your upcoming interview as well. So I will send that out again after today's session that you can think through as just another resource to consider as you prepare for Zoom and or your virtual platforms. Yay, we are trucking along here. So now we've gotten to the interview. So you have done your preparation, you have done your research, you are excited and nervous and anxious and fill in the blank emotion. You are entering the interview stage. And so now I want to think through strategies and techniques of how to represent yourself best during the interview. So a couple things to consider here, a couple elements, but the thought process here is to think through that 93% of communication is actually nonverbal. So a lot of times when we first interact with somebody else, whether it be in person and now the added virtual element, is that initial interaction, you start to formulate an opinion. You start to formulate an association of that person. And so what are ways that you can represent yourself to the best of your ability as a confident, as an adaptable, as a flexible, and even as a dependable engineer? And so these are some elements that I want you to consider. And so your facial expression, how you represent yourself, eye contact. So always looking at, as we're doing now virtually, at the camera as much as possible. We do fall into the trap of looking at ourselves in the screen, and so that's always tough. But voice tone, being able to slow down, again, take a deep breath. I know I haven't gotten silent much today, but silence is okay in an interview process, to gather your thoughts, to really process through what's being asked of you so that you can intentionally answer the question to the best of your ability. Hands, you've probably noticed myself, I'll call myself out. I talk with my hands a lot. And so what are effective strategies that you can do to minimize distraction? For me, for one, I hold a pen a lot of times when I teach, when I present, when I interview, and not a pen to swivel around, but just a pressure point so that I can keep my hands down at a level so that it doesn't become a distraction. Handshake. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, so I've got a quick question. Do you recommend like using a background or something like that? Like if you live somewhere where it's kind of a messy background, do you recommend kind of putting something behind you?
Sure. I think you are welcome to use a virtual background. Some platforms have that ability. I don't entirely know about all platforms, but if that is an option, I say sure. And find a quick Google search of interview Zoom backgrounds exist, and they're actually fine to use. If you ever need one, our office has one created for the College of Engineering that I'm happy to share out. And so that could be another option as well. But yes, if that allows you to limit any type of distraction behind you, I think that that is completely fine. Handshake, again, as mentioned earlier, is probably now that has been minimized or gone away. And so knowing that that initially sometimes is the formal kind of ability to shake someone's hand to kind of really greet them, I think it would be well understood if you didn't immediately have your hand out for an in-person interaction. Posture. I can't say enough about posture. If nothing else, sitting up straight allows you to breathe easier, allows you to really take that deep breath, to slow down. And so shoulders back, you know, being able to sit up straight really allows you to represent yourself confidently and allows you to, if nothing else, take a couple deep breaths before you continue on with what you're discussing. So couple options there to consider during the interview, really even before you get going in conversation. So as we start thinking about the conversation itself, the interview, this is probably at times one of the toughest elements to get through, but in theory it should be one of the easiest, but it's not always, is the lovely tell me about yourself question that gets started in most interviews, whether it be informally as you enter the building, enter the facility, as you first hop on and are led into the interview room via Zoom. It's that personal introduction. And so at the end of this session today, I'm going to include an elevator pitch guide that our office has created that you can use and adapt for upcoming career fair, virtual platform interactions, as well as the interview process. But a couple things to think about in your personal introduction is knowing that it's fluid, knowing that at times you will only get out, hello, I'm Marissa Miller, it's nice to meet you, and then it automatically gets started in conversation. Other times you might get a formalized, please, to get us started today, please tell me about yourself. And this is a time to really allow yourself to share who you are and also why you are within this very interaction. So who you are and why you're here today is an element to maybe consider. So introducing yourself, it's helpful to know, as you know, I'm Marissa Miller. You can start to think about engaging in what current program are you a part of at Auburn, where are you at in that process. They are aware of the position of what you're interviewing for, but talk about why are you excited about the role of what you're interviewing for? What has motivated you to go through this interview process to be able to potentially be selected for the role of what you're meeting about? You can then start to think about maybe elements. This kind of goes back to the research. Start to share what you know about the role, what you know about the company, and why it's important for you to be a candidate for this role. And that, again, will get into maybe an experience that you've had that you feel has best prepared you to be a candidate for this summer internship, to even pursue this full-time role. So I could probably spend a whole, oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt? Did I interrupt?
Oh, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So just a question I had about that is that I've heard advice given even before that, or like, okay, elevator pitch, you need to, tell them why they want to hire you and stuff. But I know if I, started spewing off like, why I was an awesome applicant or stuff like, I'm a software engineering major, and I worked on such and such a research project doing XYZ, and I put together this and that. I had made my own personal website. I mean, that's it's going to sound too rehearsed.
Sure.
this is what I was thinking, but is the idea kind of, as opposed to listing off your qualification, is it better to go about, like, maybe talk about the position itself, or like I was, I was really interested in the such and such a position because as I thought it would be a great opportunity to get some experience doing programming for, or blah blah blah, et cetera, et cetera. And a great leadership opportunity, and help for my community, and maybe incorporate something from the company's mission statement, like helping community, et cetera, et cetera. That
Yeah, I think
that's
it's a
the
great question. I would say take it from the lens of, this is just an initial question in an interview, and you will have the entire interview to fuse in experiences and relevant information based off of the questions that you would be asked. Environment is also, so this could be an initial introduction right before the interview starts, versus maybe at a career fair, you're only getting those initial couple minutes to really share an overview of your qualifications and your intent and experience or interest in the role. And so in the lens of an interview, this would be more introductory, to maybe pick one of those experiences that really speaks to your skill set and really speaks to why it has led you to apply for this role, knowing that you don't want to show all your cards at once. And so are there other experiences, other skills that you will then be able to fuse into additional responses? And that might be a good way to kind of balance that. But Hannah or Ashton, please feel free to hop in if you have any additional elements to share.
I think that was good. I would just say that for sure, if it's an interview, a sit down interview, don't go into all of that yet. It's just a brief, like, tell me about yourself, tell me where you are, because you will have time later in the interview with the questions that will be asked to go on about why we should hire you and your kind of qualifications on that end.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
So as we transition on, and again, I wish I could spend a whole hour on that with introductions, but thinking through additional questions that may be asked of you. So I would love to hear students in the chat box, if you just want to share what's maybe the most difficult interview question that you've been asked before. And I may have taken the answer from some of tell me about yourself. So additional questions that may have felt challenging or may have felt difficult in an interview you have had before. Just pop those in the chat box. And while I get those responses, Hannah and Ashton, be thinking about, what is your favorite question to ask future engineers at your organization? All right, so some difficult questions. What is your biggest weakness? Yes. When have you been a leader in something? Tell me about a time when you and a coworker had a conflict and how did you resolve? Tell me about a time when you failed and how you responded. Tell us about a time you did something unethical, which seemed like a really loaded question. Yes, Sean, that is an overloaded question. I see it. Yes, yes, that is a loaded question. And also, I see a theme here. It is, a lot of times it's asking something you didn't do correctly, or something that you're not proud of, something that is a weakness or an area of improvement. So yeah, those can be difficult, as you want to represent yourself best and you want to showcase, like, I am it, you want me. And then it's, so Marissa, tell me about a time you failed. And you're like, ugh, and your confidence just gets hit. And so we'll talk about kind of ways to fuse that together. But Hannah and Ashton, what's maybe a favorite question that you like to ask that maybe you feel is a little bit difficult?
I try not to be, like, I guess, as difficult per se. I mean, I like asking, so one of the questions I think is hard that some people ask is like, where do you see yourself in like 5 to 10 years? And I think that that's so hard, but it is something in our industry that like we kind of ask it a way of like, are you wanting to like settle down, have a family? Because, you know, you're not necessarily technically allowed to ask like certain things like that, or like, are you engaged, or, you know, things like that. But what are your goals? Because we travel a lot if you're on the field side and things like that. So, I mean, because if someone asked me today at 25, what are your 5 to 10 year goals? I don't know. So when I ask them that, I'm like, oh, I hope no one ever asks me this, you know. So I think that that's hard, but I also like what motivates you, and give us an example of why that motivates you.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, Hannah.
Okay.
In terms of that question, do you suggest that we say something in regards to the company, or should we, like, if we want to work for NASA and the company is obviously not NASA in 5 years, do you suggest that we say that, or just kind of leave that off of what our answer is?
I would maybe not necessarily say the company name, but say like a, you know, world-class aerospace, you know, company or something like that. Like kind of give it a little towards them as well, but not necessarily. I mean, I think that anyone working at any aerospace would love to go work at NASA, you know, so I don't think that that's necessarily a bad thing either to, you know, have high goals and want to get there.
Right. So just kind of keep it general. Okay.
That's what I would do.
Thank you.
Awesome. And there was a follow-up question about what if some of those difficult questions you don't have a response for, like maybe you don't feel like you've ever done anything unethical, or you haven't had an interaction, a conflict with a coworker before. And I think from the lens there is to, if you don't have an immediate response or you don't have an example, I would encourage you to not say, that's never happened to me before. Can you process through maybe why they're asking you that? And so although you personally haven't experienced a conflict with a classmate that you haven't been able to overcome, think about projecting it as to, if you were faced in that situation, this is how I would navigate the situation. And so being able to still have an answer, have a response, but the reason no employer is trying to nitpick you and to find that weakness or to find a time that you were unethical, whatever that involved. It is wanting to, an employer is wanting to hear you problem solve, critically think through a situation, and also troubleshoot. And so that would be something I would recommend for you is, please don't take offense to the questions if they have a negative connotation, but process through that and figure out ways to initiate that you can problem solve and you can work through difficult situations, would be my suggestion. But we are,
regarding
for time, I'm sorry to cut you off. We are just going to continue on with the presentation, but if we'll just hold questions to the end, that way we can get through the content, but I will happily make sure to stay on and answer any and all questions. So if you have questions from this portion, please go ahead and put them in the chat. And again, I will make sure that we get you a response. So in the question types, we have a couple different areas to explore. And so some behavioral based questions, technical questions, and then even resume based questions. And so these are samples of each, but knowing that the interview itself will not solely ask about just your resume, will not solely ask about all projected, what would you do in this situation, or tell us about a time, but there's going to be a balance of each. And so really, again, understanding yourself best, your experiences, but also ways of which you all can really apply your technical skills and expertise and apply the knowledge that each of you are gaining in the classroom and being able to apply it to that professional setting is something that I would recommend here. And so just some elements to consider here, how to troubleshoot, how to problem solve, and how to navigate that option as well. So with that, an element to consider is how to answer questions best. And we talk about the STAR method. This again will be an added attachment to all of you after we wrap up this evening. But you may have heard about the STAR method before, but we think about this as an approach to eliminate the fear of the rabbit trail of just talking and not necessarily getting to the point, but also ensuring that you are answering the question for what the question is and what's being asked of you. So STAR method, we think about situation, task, action, and then result, as well as reflection. And so in being asked a behavioral-based question or a situation-based question, tell us about a time you worked on a team, or tell us about a time you failed to reach a goal. Whatever that lens is, you want to set up the situation, set up kind of the environment and understanding so the employer has perspective of what you're about to share. The task, so what was the need that you had to pursue? So what was your role? What was something that maybe you had to accomplish? The action is what actually happened. So how did you approach the situation? What was it that you initiated? Making sure to use I language to really focus in on, that's the ability for you to discuss your skill set, to talk about elements of which you contributed to, and being able to be mindful that you've set up the stage, you've talked about what needed to happen, you talked about what you actually contributed, and then what was the result? Discussing the impact of what you learned, what you gained, what you valued out of that situation. Something that I get asked at times is, does it have to be a positive outcome? And I would say no. It does not always have to end with sunshine and rainbows, but I want you to really reflect on, if it didn't turn out according to plan, if you failed to reach a goal, what did you learn and how are you going to apply that to the future? Would be my recommendation of ways to think about the STAR method. And so, but as you're seeing, this can be an element to really consider in any type of response to ensure that you're setting up the situation, the environment, you're giving that level of detail, but you're not getting so lost in, well, Hannah said, and then Ashton said, and then I did this, and then you're 3 minutes in and you have not even gotten close to the response. And so I want you to be thinking about not only how to approach and utilize the STAR method, but how to then relate it back to your future role with that organization, or how did this experience best prepare you for that design engineering role with that company, or with that project management role with that organization. This takes practice, and so that will be something that we can happily meet about after today's session. We can set up an opportunity to talk through the STAR method further. Near the end of today, there are multiple ways to actually schedule mock interviews, and so we'll definitely talk through that, and being able to get to practice the STAR method as well. Wonderful. So bear with me. I just want to point out, I know that it is 3 minutes until 6 and we got started late today. So students, if you have to hop off, you will not offend us one bit. I will make sure you all receive this recording after tonight's presentation, but we are going to keep trucking along. So stay with us if you can, and I will do my best to cover the remaining few slides in the next few minutes. But thank you for bearing with us here. So into kind of thinking through questions for interviewers, that's an element that Ashton and Hannah alluded to in using notes, but also through your research, I hope that you find questions that you want to learn more about. Because again, this interview is not only for you to respond to all of the questions, but you to also information gather, if you will. And so these are some questions and examples to consider, but being mindful of the framework for which the question's being asked. So I want you to think through elements that would showcase that you've researched the company, that you're interested in the company, and that maybe you want to learn more about your future team, your future supervisor, the work environment. What are professional development opportunities? It feels like a lot of times the question for the interviewers don't happen until the end, but they might happen throughout. And so write questions down as you're learning, as you're being asked questions, and as the interviewer is also providing insight after your response. Maybe you might say, I didn't know that they did that, or I would love to learn more about that process. That would be a really great element and an additional question to showcase you're paying attention, you're listening, you're engaged, but you want to learn more and you want to be able to get the most out of your experience so that you feel confident in deciding that you are going to accept that full-time role with Vulcan Materials. You are going to accept that summer internship with Hoar Construction. And so those are great things to consider there as well. So lots of things. Questions that I just want you to be mindful of that should not be asked in the workplace. And these are some initial suggestions. Please, Hannah and Ashton, please chime in if there are other questions that maybe we aren't referring to or having on here. But Hannah mentioned this early on, is just any type of personal information that may not, that should not be considered a factor in your candidacy. So your nationality, background, ethnicity, age, any type of relationships that you might be in, any type of affiliation, so religious, political, any other specific organization that could potentially be questioned or could be an element that you would never want to be in the deciding factor. You want to be able to share what you are comfortable sharing and how you represent yourself best. So these are some elements to consider. Evaluation criteria. So these are some, again, we talked about a lot of these. So nonverbal communication, again, 93% of communication is nonverbal. And so know that in an interview process, no, someone is not going to not hire you because you twirl your hair or you talk with your hands or you say and like every other word. However, I want you to be mindful that the interviewer is also not solely listening to your responses to decide if you're the best candidate and you're the ideal candidate for the role. And so thinking through how to communicate best, both verbally and non-verbally, representing yourself best, dressing for success, even behavioral dimensions. If asked a question, some of your examples that has a negative connotation, your greatest weakness, and you immediately respond with, I don't have any weaknesses. How that is displaying a behavioral element that they might be concerned about. Can Marissa take constructive criticism? Is Marissa arrogant? Does Marissa have the ability to self-identify when maybe things don't go according to plan? Is she going to not be able to handle stress well? So there's a lot of ways in which your body language and how you communicate can really speak to the type of person and professional that you will be. Ashton and Hannah both laughed. I wondered if they ever had that interaction in an interview process.
It for sure
Unfortunately,
happens.
times.
You both are like,
And that's when the awkward silence comes in, you know, that's when you're like, okay. I guess my advice would, I know we all have weaknesses, you know, I could name a long list of mine, but even if you don't have maybe something that would be like a career weakness or something that you've learned while you're in college, think back to like, you played sports, maybe something that you learned a really hard lesson in a sporting event, just something that you can bring to the table so that they know you're at least self-aware enough to know that those weaknesses exist. So.
Yes, and that's something I had written down prior to this to discuss, was being able to like equate your interests and hobbies, like leadership roles or community service you've done, and that use those skills and experience for answering some of those type questions. Like if it hasn't necessarily happened to you at work, using that and kind of twisting it on how, you know, how you handle that or how these skills and experience would benefit the organization that you're trying to work for.
mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you. Then the end of the interview, and in looking at this, I recognize that shaking hands virtually is not an option. So these are just some recommendations in person, but also how to navigate in ending the interview from a virtual perspective. Maybe don't wave, but shaking hands, that may not happen regardless in person or not, but being able to pause and hear from the interviewer how they wrap up the interview, being as gracious and thankful as you can. And so thanking each of them for their time, potentially if it is multiple people, if it's a panel interview, thanking, thank you, Hannah, it was nice to meet you. Ashton, I so loved hearing more about Vulcan materials, and I look forward to following up. And so that can be a way to kind of put the bow on top at the end of the interview. Collect business cards. Again, from a virtual perspective, if you don't already have contact information from each of the individuals that you interview with, my piece of advice is to make sure you wrote down their names as you were interviewing. And then you can either follow up with your main point of contact to either write a thank you note and have it passed along to the interviewers that you mentioned or that you met with, or inquire and request if you can get email addresses for those interviewers as well to be able to write individualized thank you notes as well. In addition, it never hurts to get those names and look on LinkedIn. You can message on LinkedIn. It feels informal, but it also is a way to just add engagement and add that opportunity to connect with them. Establishing next steps, that goes back to the questions of it is okay to ask for next steps regarding the process, the interview process, and the hiring process itself. And so that will most likely be disclosed at some point, but you are welcome to ask about that. The one suggestion back with questions as well that I failed to mention is refraining from asking about salary and benefits during the interview process unless asked from the interviewer, like what is your expected salary. I more so would encourage you to wait until you receive an offer to be able to then negotiate based off of your needs. And so that would be a recommendation that we can talk further about as well. Couple more slides. Thank you all for bearing with us. So reflecting and following up after the interview, not only as you wrap up that day, but now what? So again, we talked about this early on, is do I just patiently or impatiently wait for someone to call me, or how can I be proactive in following up about my interview and my candidacy? So again, as we go through how to follow up and write thank you notes. Oh, sorry, I skipped a slide. So being able to think through the reflection process of being able to understand, okay, how was the interview? I think spending time like actually thinking through how did that go? And also we as humans, as perfectionists, immediately go, oh, I shouldn't have said that, or oh, I had a better response for that, or oh, Ashton was looking at me funny, I must have had something on my shirt. Like that is what we immediately think about, but I want you to reflect on the interview process as a whole. And also, how did you feel after that interview? So did you get a good sense of what the company was like and how your role would look, how the work environment was, and being able to really understand based off of the questions that were asked, is that going to be telling for what they're expecting of you as a candidate? Most likely. And so you can reflect on that. Yes, reflect on your responses, but don't be so hard on yourself, because in reality, you can't change what has already been said, but you can still be proactive in following up if you still have questions, if you have reservations about the role, if you still need clarity about understanding what next steps may look like. It's okay to reflect on that first and then be able and begin that follow-up process. So in following up, I would say again with thank you notes, and then a decision has been made. And so this is something that we get asked about as well, is I recommend not following up the very next day to ask if a decision has been made, but also being very careful in how you're communicating that. I think proactively from a thank you note perspective is using that confident language in, I look forward to hearing from you about next steps. I look forward to hearing from you regarding my candidacy, and even being mindful that you can ask if a timeline would be that they would be able to share, could be another recommendation. Then after you do that, in terms of timeline, that will be dependent on role, dependent on company, and dependent on what was communicated to you of, we're wrapping up interviews this Friday, we'll be in touch next week. If that gives you a time frame when next week rolls around, it is then okay to re-engage and to follow up and just, again, reiterating your interest in the role and the company, and then being able to ask about a timeline. If timelines are not shared, That's something we can speak about individually based on what's been communicated to you thus far, and being able to still be proactive in the roles of which you're interviewing for and how to follow up with them best. And so we can chat through that as well. Job offer, this is just one quick element to consider, is we will be doing a job offer and salary negotiation workshop in October. But before now and then, you may be getting offers, and so how to navigate that process. Our biggest piece of advice is to not accept right away, not accept on the spot, because you need to reflect on the whole offer. You also need to think through, okay, so I really liked meeting Hannah and Ashton. I think I could work great with them. I'm really excited about the role. I feel good about moving to Orlando to do that. But you still have a lot to consider in that job offer. Is the salary an opportunity to still support yourself with the cost of living in Orlando? Are there professional development opportunities? How can I navigate benefits and retirement and all the elements that go into a job offer? It is not just about the salary itself. You want to think about all the elements that have been offered to you. And so we can meet to discuss that individually. That remains completely confidential, students. So when you meet with myself or my colleague, Jessica Bowers, you are welcome to disclose what the offer is. You do not have to do so. And we can still talk through the process and best practices to potentially negotiate your offer. What are best ways to accept an offer? What are also ways to graciously decline an offer? And that happens. You're allowed to say no. And so we can navigate each of those arenas together individually. So as we wrap up today, I just want to highlight a couple opportunities. Again, I will be sure to share a couple additional guides that were referenced throughout today's presentation. I'm also going to share this PowerPoint and this recording. So you've got lots of information coming to each of your inboxes, but tools to prepare. We offer in our office mock interviews that you can schedule, and we will be able to really cater that towards the specific position that you plan to interview with. We also have appointments available. You can schedule on Handshake about interview preparation, and also any process involved in the internship, co-op, and job search process. Interview Stream is an online platform where you can practice interviews in a virtual element. You'll actually be able to either choose a pre-created interview for engineering. You can also develop your own questions, and it's a recording mechanism. So the question will come across the bottom. You have 2 minutes to record your response, and then you can play it back. That is a great option for students who, like myself, know that you talk with your hands, or maybe you're someone who plays with their hair, or maybe you're someone that uses like other vocal fillers. Interview Stream is a fantastic resource to help alleviate some of that. Another opportunity that's happening next Thursday are engineering mock interviews with young alumni. So we have over 40 young alumni that are anxiously awaiting for each of you to sign up to have a mock interview for next Thursday. So if you want to access that today, please visit that OBBY link. I will also send that out, and you should have received an email this week from either your department chair or from Handshake. But we have the ability, you can schedule a mock interview where you'll not only be able to practice with industry professionals in similar, maybe they graduated from the same program you're currently a part of, maybe they work for a company you're interested in. You'll also be able to get resume feedback with those young alumni as well. And so I highly encourage you to sign up for that. Please sign up soon so that I can get you matched with alumni for next Thursday. Those will all happen via Zoom. We made it. We made it to the end of today's presentation, so I cannot thank you all enough for being here. Thank you so much to Hannah and Ashton for joining us today on your Wednesday evening. And so, like I mentioned, students, if you have follow-up questions, I know there's some in the chat box, I will happily be able to follow up with those. If you have other questions or want to set up a time to meet with myself or my colleague, Jessica Bowers, you are welcome to do so via Handshake. So thank you all again for attending tonight's presentation, and I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your week.